In this video, I'm going to show how I lower my risk of having a heart attack. Most of us know what we need to do to look after our hearts, but if you're like me, you're busy and you easily get into bad habits, and this stops you from doing the right thing. In this video, I'm going to outline a simple system I've created which helps me repeatedly make the right choices to lower my risk of having a heart attack. A lot of the ideas that have informed my system come from this book, Outlive: The Science and Art of Longevity by Peter Attia, which is a book I'd highly recommend, and I'll put a link in the description. So this is my system. I've used Excel. I think Excel as a mobile app is very underrated. I've used it for decades on the PC and always felt like the mobile app was pretty unusable, but nowadays it's actually really good on tablets or on the iPhone. So these are the thresholds that I've created based on a number of things, including the book and studies that I've read and guidance. And so I've got input figures of things I need to do, and then output are things that show me the kind of outcome and the results of kind of the good choices I've made. So let me start with some of the more obvious things. So I've got the blood pressure thresholds, which are from some studies, but also the British Heart Foundation and also the NHS guidance. And it goes without saying, these just my figures. Obviously, consult your doctor for more accurate figures for yourself. But yeah, so that's where I've got the blood pressure figures. And then in terms of waist circumference, there's growing evidence that roughly half your height should be what you're aiming for in terms of waist circumference. And I think the NHS now recommend that. And when you add ethnicity, it changes it a bit. And so for me, I think 90 is also good, but if you add ethnicity, then aiming for something more like 80 is better. I think 75 would be very difficult for me to reach. And then in terms of weight, I use the BMI, the body mass index, again to work out these thresholds. And again, when you add ethnicity, it changes the figure. So for me, healthy is actually 168 pounds. I find pounds much more helpful to work with. But when you add ethnicity, it should be more like 150 and 130. I don't think I'd ever get to that figure. And then you've got the VO2 max. So what is the VO2 max? And in the book, he talks about how important this figure is and how it's the single most important figure in terms of telling you how healthy someone's heart is. And so I've got a definition which I'm going to read. So the VO2 max is a measure of the maximum amount of oxygen that an individual can utilize during intense or maximal exercise. And it's considered one of the best indicators of cardiovascular fitness and aerobic endurance. So this figure can tell you how healthy you are. Now, this is usually calculated in a lab and takes a long period of time. Fortunately, the Apple Watch can calculate it based on runs, based on the pace, and based on your heart rate. It then can calculate your VO2 max. So this is really useful. These thresholds are based on age mainly. 39 is still not too bad, I don't think. But 53 is like an athlete, so I don't think I'd ever get to that. So let's think about some of the input. So how do you get a higher VO2 max? So there's been a lot of evidence that shows that high intensity or HIIT training or interval training is how you get there, but there's kind of growing evidence that using the 80-20 method, or it's known as polarized training or pyramid training, is a much more effective way of increasing the VO2 max. And so there's a particularly good TED talk on how this ratio works really well. I'll link it in the description. And so what are the heart rate zones? So the heart rate zones are calculated by looking at your maximum heart rate. So this is my data, and this is from an app called Tempo, which is a really good app that takes data from running and calculates different things. And so there's different ways of calculating it. So you can calculate it based on age, but the better way to calculate it is to use your maximum heart rate and your resting heart rate, which then creates a heart rate reserve. And then you use these figures based on percentages to calculate your zones. And you can get apps that do it automatically for you. So this app calculates it for you. And so, and without going into too much detail on the science, what you want to do is keep 80% of your exercise in zone 2, and then 20% or even 10% within zone 4. And so, going back to this, so I can use that to then work out roughly a proportion. So this is kind of 54 minutes at zone 2 is good per week. So this is all weekly. And then in zone 4, 6 minutes is pretty good per week. So then in the book, it talks about how in order to do the 80-20, and particularly the zone 4 training, you need to build up strength and stability in the muscles. Otherwise, you're just going to get injured when you do this training. So in order to then do the zone 2 and zone 4 training, you need to then have stretching and some sort of exercise to build flexibility. And so I've got a range of stretches that I do, mainly around the legs, but a range of stretches that I do after like a long run or a hard run. And so ideally twice a week, but more. And then I've got some resistance and strength building. So again, both of those prevent injury and mean that you can then do more of the zone 2 and zone 4 training. And so the resistance is typically doing weights, and there's loads of evidence that it goes through in the book on the benefits of doing weight training. So that's the stretching and the resistance. And then in terms of sleep, we know that sleeping well lowers your risk of heart attacks. In the book Why We Sleep, he talks about how there's one day in the year that people have heart attacks more than any other day in the year. And that one day is the day after the clocks have been moved forward and you get 1 hour less sleep, which is really interesting. And there's growing evidence that shows that people who have unpredictable sleep, who have particularly poor sleep, are at higher risk of heart disease and many other conditions. So getting a good amount of sleep is important. And then last of all, calories. So and this obviously links in with the weight and other things. So there's a way in which you can calculate how many calories you need per day, which I've worked out is roughly 2100. I still lose weight very slowly if I have 2100 calories, and so I calculate that using MyFitnessPal. So this is the system that I use. Hope you found it interesting. I then use this information to then, firstly I track the calories using a particular formula and forecasting, which I can kind of go through in another video. But I also then use the thresholds to then track weekly where things are going in each of these areas, and so perhaps I can cover this in a future video. But I hope you have enjoyed this video, and if you have, please like and please subscribe to my channel. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to watch the video that I did on how to improve your sleep quickly. That's it from me. See you in the next one.